This video is about adding and subtracting rational numbers, specifically fractions. And you'll notice it says part 1 because we are going to look at same denominators only in this video. So with same denominators, if we're going to add those like denominator fractions, all we need to do is add or subtract the numerators and put that result over the denominator. When we see an example like this, 1/4 plus 2/4, we notice that the denominators are the same, so we really do not need to worry about it. What we need to focus on is those numerators. So we're going to keep that denominator of 4, and here in the numerator I have 1 plus 2. We know that 1 plus 2 equals 3, so we're able to say that this happens to equal 3/4. We can take a look here at this second example and using the same idea, but we notice that it's a little bit different. Above here in example 1 we had 2 positives. In example 2 we have a positive plus a negative number. So if we follow this same rule of keeping the denominator because they are the same, if I take these numerators 1 plus -2, we should know that 1 plus -2 equals -1. How do we know this? Well, we know when we have 1 positive and 2 negatives, we can create a zero pair with opposite signs. So we can see that there are extra negatives or 1 extra negative, so our net result is a -1. We're going to take that -1 and put it in the numerator. So our answer to this particular problem is -1/4. When I look at example 3 here, this time we have the negative first. Again, with the same denominator, we'll use the 4. And in the numerators, I have -1 plus 2. So here I have 1 negative and 2 positives. We can see the net result being 1 extra positive, so it would be +1. So this would give us +1. Let's take a look at one more before we look at subtraction problems. Here I have a -1/4 plus a -2/4. Following the same pattern, keeping the denominator of 4, if I work over here on the side, I have -1 plus -2. 1 negatives and 2 negatives, altogether I have 3 negatives, resulting in -3/4. It's much easier for us to conduct addition problems, so we're going to use that idea of what is simpler and easier for us to do subtraction problems. So when we have same denominators and we want to subtract like denominator fractions, we're going to change the problem to an addition problem. And the way we do that is we're going to add the additive inverse. Once we do that, we can change a subtraction problem to an addition problem. And then we're going to follow our rules as before. We're going to add or subtract the numerators and then put the result over the denominator. So when we look at this, we have truly a subtraction problem, 1/4 minus 2/4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change it to an addition problem. So we keep the first number, which happens to be 1/4. We're going to change the subtraction to addition. And then we're going to look at the second number. Here we have a +2/4. I need the additive inverse of that, or the inverse operation of adding or subtracting. So we're going to put the opposite. So we're back to where we were with an addition problem. So I'm going to keep that denominator of 4, and my numerator now is 1 plus a -2. And we've just solved this earlier, so this answer would be -1. So by circling this subtraction sign and showing it, it'll allow you to look at that second number to see, is that second number positive or negative? This one is positive, so we would write down the negative. If it was negative, we would write a positive. So let's practice a few more scenarios with positives and negatives in subtraction situations so that you can see all the different ways of looking at it. Here we have 1/4 minus -2/4. So once again, our first step is to rewrite as an addition problem. So I'm going to keep that 1/4. I'm going to change this subtraction sign to an addition sign, and I can see that this is -2/4. Well, I want the additive inverse of that, so that would be +2/4. Going to combine them together, keep the denominator of 4, and we know that 1 plus 2 would equal 3, so our numerator then becomes 3. So our answer is 3/4 to this question. Looking at another example here, example number 7, what we want to do is do the same thing. Change it to an addition problem. Negative 1/4 minus 2/4 becomes negative 1/4. Change the subtraction to addition. The opposite of positive 2/4 is negative 2/4. We have same denominator, keep that denominator of 4, and I'm looking at negative 1 plus a negative 2, which we know is negative 3, and putting that as our numerator. I have one more scenario here, I think, with all the different variables having negatives in different places. So we have, and we're going to change this to, again, to an addition problem. I have negative 1/4 minus negative 2/4. We keep the first number, which is negative 1/4. We change the subtraction sign to an addition sign. This is negative 2/4, so I want the opposite or the additive inverse. That would be positive 2/4. Keep that denominator of 4 because they are alike. Negative 1 plus 2. We know that negative 1 plus 2 is positive 1, so our answer to this is positive 1. As we can see, using single fractions is pretty simple and pretty easy. What happens though when we get mixed numbers? There are two methods you can look at, and we're going to cover both methods. So here we have 1 1/4 minus 2 2/4. And again, I'm going to do two different methods, starting with method number 1. But before I do anything, because it is a subtraction problem, I need to change it to an addition problem. So 1 1/4 plus, right, because that subtraction is going to turn to addition. This is a positive 2 2/4, becomes a negative 2 2/4. Now, according to method 1, method 1 says change them to improper fractions, because if we change them to improper fractions, they will look just like our other problems were, where they were a single fraction and a single fraction. So let's try that. 1 1/4 becomes 5/4 plus negative 4 times 2 is 8 plus 2 more is 10, so 2 2/4 becomes negative 10/4. Following our rule that we did before, we would keep the denominator of 4, and then we have 5 plus a negative 10, and when we add those together we get negative 5, and we get the answer of negative 5/4. Now, because this is an improper fraction, we have to go back to a mixed number. We know that it's going to turn out to be negative, so we're going to take negative 5/4 and we're going to change it to its mixed number, which is negative 1, because you can get one whole out of this, and there would be 1 left over, so negative 5/4 would become negative 1 1/4. For someone who might need a refresher on how to change these back, remember this is 5 divided by 4. 4 will go into 5 one time with 1 left over, so that's where that 1/4 came from, 1 out of 4. But because it's negative, it's going to carry the negative sign. So that's method 1. Method 1 is do it as an improper fraction, which you could do when the numbers are small like this, but when the numbers are bigger, it makes it a little impractical to do it with improper fractions. So I'm going to give you a second method. So in the second method, we still have to do the same thing. 1 1/4 plus, because we have to change this subtraction problem to an addition problem. This is positive 2 2/4, so it becomes negative 2 2/4. Now, what we can do in method 2 is going to be grouping by parts. So I have a whole number of 1 and a whole number of negative 2. So I'm going to do 1 plus negative 2. That's going to be one part of this. So we're going to do like partial addition. 1 plus negative 2 happens to be negative 1. Then I'm going to take my fractions, which happen to be 1/4 and negative 2/4, and I'm going to add those together. And I get 4 as my denominator, and my numerator is 1 plus negative 2, which is negative 1. So what I'm going to do now, if I can move this out of the way a little bit because it's kind of attaching there. Good. So you can see that 1/4. All I need to do is take these two and add them together. So they're both negative, so I'm going to add them and put them together. So I get negative 1 1/4. So you can see I'm still back at what I did before. Not as much work by treating the whole numbers separately from the fractions, because I'm adding and subtracting. I'm not borrowing like we used to do with regular standard fractions. when positives and negatives aren't involved. Hopefully this explains same denominator, rational fractions, a little bit better for you.